Senator Rand Paul blasting Dr. Anthony Fauci, playing his own words back to him, saying, in 2004, you sounded a whole lot different than you sound right now. And what gives? Congress is back in session after we're getting done listening to Rand take care of Fauci in a very satisfying clip that we'll spend a lot of time on. We're going to hear Hank Johnson saying that MAGA Republicans coordinated like terrorist groups to take out school board meetings all across America. We're going to hear Jamie Raskin suddenly fighting for civic activists. And then we're going to hear Ron Johnson get 3 different Twitter executives to release or finally admit that, yeah, they can swing elections big time. They know it. Everybody knows it. This is Senator Rand Paul versus Anthony Fauci. Fauci comes back in front of the Senate, and this has been a long battle that's been going on for the eons. And finally, we're back for another season. Rand Paul gets the floor. It's his turn, his time at the Senate. It's his time. And he starts it off with a very interesting clip from Anthony Fauci back in 2000s.
But she's had the flu for 14 days. Should she get a flu shot?
Well, no. If she got the flu for 14 days, she's as protected as anybody can be, because the best vaccination is to get infected yourself.
And
So
she should not get it?
if she really has the flu, she definitely doesn't need a flu vaccine.
That makes sense.
If she really has the flu.
She should not get it again.
No, she doesn't need it, because it's the most potent vaccination is getting infected yourself.
Right. Makes sense, right?
This is an ongoing question, and we've had ever-evolving opinions from you, Dr. Fauci. Currently, antibody surveys show that 80% of children, approximately 80% of children, have had COVID, and yet there are no guidelines coming from you or anybody in the government to take into account their naturally acquired immunity. You seemed quite certain of yourself in 2004, but in 2022, there's a lot less certainty. One of the things that we also know after looking at this for 2 to 3 years is that the mortality from COVID is very similar, if not less, than influenza. So when we look at this, we wonder, why you seem to really embrace basic immunology back in 2004 and why you seem to reject it now.
Yeah, big difference between what you said back then when, if you get sick and you've got the actual flu, well, you don't need all the vaccines because you've got the antibodies built up. You're kind of immune, and you talked a lot about that. Like, obviously, everybody knows this is pretty basic. We kind of learned that like in grade school or something, right? And I get it. You're not going to get it again. It's like you get the chicken pox, you're going to get it once, not going to get it a million times. Why? Because you already had it, right? You got to go through all this as a kid. But something happened in the COVID era. They had a lot of certain things to sell, didn't they? And so now Rand Paul is asking Fauci about this. What flipped there, good doctor?
Well, I don't reject basic immunology, Senator. And I have never denied that there is importance of the protection following infection. However, as we have said many times, and as has been validated by the authorization by the FDA through their committee and the recommendation by the CDC through their committees, that a vaccination following infection gives an added extra boost. And that film that you showed is really taken out of context. I believe that was when someone called in who had had a reaction to a vaccine and asked me through a telephone in the interview if they should get vaccinated again. So it was in the context of someone who had a reaction. And as a matter of fact, Reuters fact-checked.
He came prepared with the fact check. Specifically, look at this. He knew that Rand Paul was going to bring this up. He's holding up a Reuters printout. It says fact check. Fauci 2004 comments are not contradictory. Do not contradict his pandemic stance, is what that document says. So he came prepared. He's like, oh, Rand, hey, dummy, I knew you were going to bring that up. Look what I've got. Reuters. Oh, Reuters. Oh, yeah, wow. Oh, so Rand Paul, man, he should just be totally embarrassed now. I guess that's the end of the conversation, Rand. You total idiot. Reuters came out and they fact-checked Fauci. Yeah. And then Fauci is also deferring who? To the CDC? How many times did they change over the last 2 years? How many times? Like every 2 months. Put the mask on. Don't put the mask on. Put the mask on. Don't put the mask on. So he defers to them. But I thought that you had all of this years of experience. You were a very astute doctor, very well educated, right? He holds up a Reuters fact check. You're wrong, Rand. Look at this document that I came. I wonder if he's got a binder of other documents there.
Looked at that and said, Fauci's 2004 comments do not contradict his pandemic stance.
End of story.
Words don't lie. If you look at the words behind me, we can go over them a little bit at a time. She doesn't need it because the most potent vaccination is getting infected.
There it
yourself.
is. It is right there. So you don't. So it's now. Rand Paul says, "I see your Reuters article, and I raise you one poster board from C-SPAN." And Fauci's like, "Oh man, he's got a poster board. Shoot. It's a lot of work to get a poster board made up. It's like expensive. You got to go to a printer like at a FedEx or something, and you got to carry it around. It doesn't fit in the car right. You know, it's like, oh gosh." And so Fauci comes with his little stupid paper. "Oh, I'm prepared." And Rand's like, yeah. Take your stupid paper and just get out of here. Get the poster board. Put the poster board up. There it is. Put it up there. What now, doctor?
It's true. It is true, Senator. It is a very potent way to protect.
So when you're trying to tell us that kids need a third or a fourth vaccine, are you including the variability or the variable of previous infection in the studies? No, you're not. Because when you have approved vaccines in recent times, and the committees that have approved it for children don't report anything on hospitalization or death or transmission. Right. They only report that if you give them the jab, they'll make antibodies. And you can give kids hundreds of jabs and they'll make antibodies every time, but that does not prove efficacy. Right. So what you're doing is denying the very fundamental premise of immunology that previous infection does provide some sort of immunity. It's not in any of your studies. Almost none of your studies from the CDC or from the government have the variable of whether or not you've been previously infected. So let's look at adults.
Don't even talk about it.
3 infections. Should I get...
It has never even been talked about, right? Natural immunity never even came into the equation, right? It was never even a choice. It was get the vax or don't. It wasn't get the vax or show that you had a positive test or anything like that. It was go buy it. It doesn't go get the jab, get it and eat it and love it.
Get a fourth one. If you're going to measure whether I get a fourth one, you need a category that has a fourth one in it, and you need one that has nothing in it, no vaccine or the fourth vaccine. But you also need to know whether they've been infected. If you ignore whether they've been infected, you're ignoring a vaccine, basically. So you're ignoring a variable. So what you're giving us is this, you decry, and people decry vaccine hesitancy. It's coming from the gobbledygook that you give us. You're not paying attention to the science. The very basic science is that previous infection provides a level of immunity. If you ignore that in your studies, if you don't present that in your committees, you're not being truthful or honest with us.
And Rand Paul is a doctor, by the way, right? So this is a doctor, right? He's got the same medical degree as any other doctor, and he's somebody who is qualified to talk on these issues. And you can sense that in his mastery of the subject matter, right? We can hear when congressional morons don't know what they're talking about. Every time they have a hearing on social media, you have all these senators going, well, what's a like? And how many likes can you like with a like? And does it like nuke China if I like it or something? You know, they have no idea what they're talking about. But Rand Paul absolutely does.
Senator, if I might respond, I have never, ever denied fundamental immunology. In fact, I wrote the chapter in the textbook of medicine on fundamental immunology.
Any of the guidelines for vaccines, do any of the guidelines for vaccines from the government include previous infection as something to base your decision-making on with vaccines? Do any of the guidelines involve previous infection? That's why you're ignoring previous infection, because it doesn't involve any of the guidelines. And furthermore, We've been asking you, and you refuse to answer whether anybody on the vaccine committees gets royalties from the pharmaceutical companies. I asked
Royalties.
you last time, and what was your response? We don't have to tell you.
Right.
We've demanded them through Freedom of Information Act, and what have you said? We're not going to tell you. But I tell you this, when we get in charge, we're going to change the rules, and you will have to divulge where you get your royalties from what companies, and if anybody in the committee has a conflict of interest, we're going to learn about it. I promise you that.
They're coming in hot for you, Dr. Fauci. And when the tables turn, you can imagine that Rand Paul is serious about this, right? A lot of the Republicans just talk and hem and haw, but Rand Paul has been on this train for quite a long time, since the very beginning. He was wandering around the Senate chambers without a mask on, and everybody in the media was melting down over it, even though he has been consistent and he has been following the science according to his interpretation of it, not believing that Dr. Fauci is the walking human version, the anthropomorphized version of science.
Mr. Chair, can I respond to that, please?
May.
Okay, there are two aspects for what you said. You keep saying you approve, you do this, you do that. The committees that give the approval are FDA through their advisory committee. The committees that recommend are CDC through their advisory committee. And you keep saying, I'm the one that's approving a vaccine.
Do you hear what he's doing? He is going to defer all of his advocacy, all of his decisions, all of his CNN appearances every time he got out there and wagged his finger at America, lecturing everybody about how many people they're killing if they don't follow his orders. He's now going to defer all of this out to the committees, CDC committee, FDA committee. I was just somebody who was a spokesperson. I was just following whatever they were telling me to do. And the committee was responsible for all of these horrendous decisions, not me.
Based on certain data. So I don't really understand, with all due respect, Senator.
You're the one that said you would not reveal what companies gave you royalties or what company gave the other scientists royalties.
Gotta move
That's
on.
what you told the committee.
Senator Paul,
Sir,
you gotta move on.
Could I
They
please
cut him
answer
off
that?
now.
Briefly,
You
yes.
keep asking committees. They're not my committees.
Yeah.
They're the VRPAC committee for the FDA and the ACIP for the CDC. So I don't have any idea what goes on
And they
with
won't
the...
reveal, as well as you won't reveal
Okay,
what
we're
companies
gonna
you got.
move on. We're over time. Senator Paul, you're over. Everyone is over a little bit. I just want to make sure we keep on time here. For the record, I know Chair Murray and previous
Now
chairs
listen.
of this committee of both parties have found videos to be out of order. And I will note for the record, the video is out of order. We'll move to Senator Smith.
Thanks, Bob Casey. He's making sure that we all know Rand Paul's video of Dr. Fauci in 2004 was out of order. And so hopefully Rand Paul feels real badly about that. And he, thinks about his orderliness at the next Senate hearing. That's Rand Paul blasting Anthony Fauci. Well deserved. Meanwhile, in other congressional hearings, we have Democrats making other statements. Representative Hank Johnson, a Democrat from Georgia, is really unhappy with parents who are concerned about their kids' educations. Says that the parents who went and protested at school meetings were analogous to J6ers or to terrorists. And this was all sort of a MAGA Republican organized attack all across America. These evil terrorist parents.
January 6, 2021 will never be forgotten, an infamous day in American history.
Okay.
MAGA Republicans descended upon the Capitol.
There it is.
Engaged in an insurrection. They occupied the Capitol. 5 people were killed, hundreds injured, including hundreds of Capitol Hill police officers attacked and bludgeoned.
With water bottles.
It was
Violent water bottles.
a day that we'll never forget. And people on the local level at affected school board meetings, they won't forget the MAGA Republicans descending on their school board meetings.
Wait, what? That's an interesting segue. So the segue goes from a raid, a protest, an insurrection, death of democracy, however you want to frame it, to now parents who are showing up at school board meetings saying, I don't appreciate you locking my schools down, or I don't appreciate you teaching my kids these very problematic topics, if they have those types of concerns and they show up and they just say, can I speak for 3 minutes? He says that's analogous to a January 6th. What?
After January 6th, like January 6th, disrupting meetings. It was a coordinated attack happening across the country. Americans won't forget about it.
Insurrectionist parents.
Members, teachers, administrators subjected to violence, threats of violence, harassment, intimidation. And in response to that, the National School Boards Association sent a letter to the Biden administration seeking federal help. Things had gotten so far out of hand. And by the way, there's not one scintilla of evidence, either direct or indirect, that there was any coordination between the Biden administration and the National School Boards Association that caused that letter to be sent seeking federal assistance. And so
terrorist parents caring about their kids' schooling, caring about what teachers are saying and what is happening in the educational systems are now analogous to J6ers. And J6ers, as we know, are being prosecuted all across America. They're the subject of a number of different congressional hearings. They are castigating entire political parties based on the events of January 6th. And now that's being extended, according to this gentleman, Rep. Hank Johnson, to all parents who care about their kids. That's the Democratic Party. That's what they're talking about in Congress. And it's not just him. Here's another representative, Ted Lieu, posted this on Twitter. The House Judiciary Democrat Committee, they came out and they said, a resolution of inquiry is directed at the President of the United States, requesting facts that are about these various measures. Ted Lieu came out and he said, I'm going to be speaking about Republican attempts, and look what he says, MAGA Republican attempts to intimidate federal law enforcement from investigating violence and threats of violence against teachers and school officials, right? So Hank Johnson comes out and says that parents who show up at PTA meetings or at school board meetings are MAGA Republicans who are analogous to January 6 terrorists. We know that they think that is true, that they're literal terrorists and insurrectionists, right? Joe Biden just gave a speech from the gates of hell explaining all of that to the country. And now they're going to say that if you're a MAGA Republican, I guess you're intimidating federal law enforcement from investigating violence. So if you complain about it, what this sounds like to me is if you complain about the FBI labeling parents civil terrorists or homegrown extremists, right? Remember, they framed all of this under homegrown violent extremism. Then if you complain about that labeling, then you are intimidating law enforcement and you're preventing them from investigating violence. Do you hear what this psychopath is talking about from California? You can't even question them. Otherwise, you're intimidating them. And that's Ted Lieu, right? And so this stuff is getting more harrowing by the day as these people and their language becomes very aggressive towards everyday living, towards caring about what happens with your kids. You're now under the subject of these psychos on congressional oversight committees. Not good. Meanwhile, we have another person named Representative Jamie Raskin. Raskin posted this on Twitter. He said, when big oil, like the companies that provide the energy for the world, when they use what he calls strategic lawsuits against public participation, these are called SLAPP lawsuits. When he says the oil companies target activists with meritless, protracted, and costly litigation, they do what, says Raskin? They chill free speech and they erode constitutional rights. You see that right there in his tweet. He says anti-SLAPP laws are necessary to keep big business from crushing civic activism. Now, this sort of is one of those that really stands out. Like, are you nuts, Jamie? Are you kidding us? First of all, you are responsible in your party for using the levers of Congress to go and investigate an entire political party called the Republican Party on the back of January 6th. So everything that you have done has chilled free speech. You have necessarily, intentionally, by the creation and the execution of your committee, trampled all over free speech and all over constitutional rights with your overbroad, unnecessary investigation. A lot of people who might have otherwise said something are not speaking up. A lot of other people who might have shown up to a protest are now not. Their speech has been chilled. Their constitutional rights have been dumped all over with the DOJ and the prosecution of many of the J6ers. But now he's going to come out and he's going to say it's the oil companies that are doing this. It's not the Congress, not the federal U.S. government through the Congress, through the DOJ, and through the FBI. No, it's the oil companies. These people are nuts. Here's what he has to say. Here is Jamie Raskin ranting and raving about the oil companies, forgetting all about the fact that he's using the strong arm of government to chill speech all across America.
It's crucial that Congress protect the rights of American citizens and civic groups to engage in lawful political protest from whatever political perspective without being subjected to ruinously expensive and meritless retaliatory litigation. Presently, 30 states have in a bipartisan manner
Meritless, costly litigation. What do you think it costs to defend yourself against January 6 subpoenas and inquisitions from the DOJ, criminal prosecutions led by the FBI? What does that cost?
adopted anti-SLAPP laws to protect citizens from baseless lawsuits. However, 18 states don't have these laws in place, and there has never been a federal anti-SLAPP law. In the coming days, I hope to introduce a strong federal anti-SLAPP corollary, and I hope my friend Ms. Mace and friends on both sides of the aisle will join me in our efforts to end the chilling and punitive practice of stifling and discouraging civic action by the people of the United States.
Can you believe that? The gall of that guy. Stuff that might limit and dissuade Americans from participating in the political process. He doesn't want that to happen, of course. That would be a big problem. Meanwhile, him and his party are on the news every single night talking about how MAGA Republicans, the entire party, are literal threats to American democracy. Okay? That's him. So he goes in Congress, he reads from a statement one direction. Meanwhile, they're passing policies and prosecuting an entire party. Insane. Our last clip is of Ron Johnson. Senator Ron Johnson got 3 Twitter executives under fire, several of them now admitting that, yeah, Twitter can, in fact, influence elections. We know that previously Twitter and a lot of these social media companies, they say, oh, no, we just share photos and we just, we like memes and we like just internet things. We don't have any real serious business in swaying an election one way or the other. But now we know, as more is revealed, that's not entirely the truth. Here is Ron Johnson with 3 Twitter executives.
Let me move on. Let me use an example that I think we're all aware of. Okay, the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Let's talk about the Hunter Biden laptop. Mr. Reuter, do you believe that, like Washington Post, that there's authentic information on that laptop?
I'm not sure. I will say that these are massive platforms. There are billions of pieces of content.
I've got very little time.
Okay. I don't know.
Mr. Bowen, do you know whether, do you assume that's authentic information on the laptop?
I don't have an opinion on the laptop.
Oh, okay. So Twitter was actually very effective when they blocked the New York Post articles on the Hunter Biden laptop.
It was very effective.
We had Jack Dorsey in front of the Commerce Committee back in, I think, October 2020, and both Senator Cruz and myself asked him, because we were talking about Russians using the platforms to impact our elections, and everybody agrees that could happen. We asked Mr. Dorsey, do you believe Twitter could impact the election? Mr. Dorsey said no.
No, yeah.
Mr. Reuter, do you believe Twitter has the capability of impacting the election?
I think all these social platforms, they're so massive, it's hard to believe that they're not impacting.
Mr. Bowen, do you believe that as well?
Yeah, these platforms absolutely have influence, and I believe they influence.
Mr. Kane?
Absolutely.
3 for 3 on that one. All 3 Twitter executives now admitting, yeah, it's true. Twitter does have a pretty big impact on elections. And when you compare that with what they did in the 2020 election, when the Hunter Biden saga was buried by the Twitter algorithms or by the people who run the algorithms, eliminating the New York Post story from reaching any of America eyeballs through the Twitter algorithm, none of it was to be seen because they knew that it could be problematic for the outcome that they desired. Ron Johnson getting them all to admit it, and now he recognizes that, yeah, this is a pretty big problem.
So there's a problem right there, okay? And I appreciate you acknowledging that fact.
Admitting it finally that, yeah, we can kind of tip the scales on these things. And when they bury stories that are perfectly legitimate, when they all sit there and they say, no, I actually can't tell you which way, yes or no, whether Hunter Biden laptop is legitimate or not, whether there's any basis for it or not, we don't really know. Well, then why'd you bury it? Why'd you censor it? Why'd you make sure that nobody could see it? Oh, that's right, because it was very problematic for your favored candidate. And so that is Ron Johnson getting 3 different Twitter executives to admit that, yeah, we do have the ability to tip the scales. Rand Paul, of course, also blasting Dr. Fauci, getting him to eat his words from 2004. We covered the source from the Trump investigation, the Russia collusion hoax, Igor Danchenko. Turns out he's a paid FBI informant. And of course, we talked all about the raid of Mike Lindell, the CEO of MyPillow and the purveyor of serene sleep all across America.